We have a very mannerless political class. They say things publicly and ask the people to behave in a particular way, but the following day, they themselves are engaging in reckless behavior. They are behaving as if they are superior beings, and it sends a very wrong message and a very wrong signal to the population. So one of the things that I would want to do is that I would want to see the Minister for Health giving professionals a greater space to speak to the public. This is not a political issue in the manner in which it is being handled. This is a health issue. Of course, it is not lost on me that it has political and economic implication, but I would rather I listen to doctors. I'd rather I listen to epidemiologists. I'd rather I listen to people who can answer 4 successive questions without reference to another person. They would be more believable. To the political class, it is important that you do what you preach. You cannot be holding these rallies. You cannot be attending funerals and behaving recklessly. The people in many parts of the country then say, if the politicians are behaving in the manner that they are, then this pandemic does not exist. These wrong signals are not good, and Kenya is leading in this kind of recklessness. I've visited a number of African countries, and you see seriousness from the political class. And this is the kind of seriousness that you want to see when you are dealing with this particular issue, this pandemic, which, as I've said, is a moving target that keeps on changing and is ravaging our economy as you and me know it.
Right. Prof, I want to move from Kenya to neighboring Tanzania, where your great friend, the late John Pombe Magufuli, passed away, and there's a new administration under Her Excellency, Madame Suluhu, who has now actually embraced the COVID-19 prevention measures, including vaccination, which her predecessor, did not want to be done. In fact, at those times, he kept saying the vaccinations are not things that we should embrace. I want to read your mind on the new direction that Tanzania is taking when as far as COVID-19 is concerned, especially looking at your reaction when it came to how President, the late Magufuli, was handling COVID-19.
First of all, let us understand one thing. The Western media and the Western-controlled African media were made to project Magufuli as a denier who was refusing to accept science. That was not my understanding. President Magufuli took the view that there is a problem, there is COVID. And indeed, you'll remember that his administration did close schools in the early days, did do the thing that everybody else was doing. But he subsequently took the view that in responding to this pandemic, there should be no one size fits all. Each country should respond on the basis of the realities. He therefore refused to close the economy. He therefore refused to make the wearing of masks mandatory on the basis that there would be herd immunity. What we forget is that Sweden adopted the same approach. What we forget is that South Korea did adopt the same approach, but because this is an African country which ought not to defy, is then projected as an outlier. And of course, it is true that the Tanzanian economy really has never been closed during this entire period, even after President Suluhu Hassan took over. And at that time, you will remember, as I've already indicated, Madagascar came up with COVID organic, and they embraced it. His view was that Africans should have solutions which are informed by the realities on the ground and not to be reliant on other civilization. What has now happened is that the administration of Suluhu Hassan has taken the view that we are going to do what everybody else is doing. We are accepting the vaccines. That is the approach of a new administration. And in my view, it does not for 1 minute suggest that the other approach was completely without merit. It simply says that this administration has succumbed to the general wave and is now succumbing to a very dominant and a very aggressive Western world, because the Western world is now dictating dictating to the world what ought to happen. And it's not only in Tanzania. We've seen how they are dealing with India. They are telling India that the vaccine that you produce are not good enough. They are introducing vaccine passports, and they are telling you which vaccines are acceptable. And once again, even as I talk about Tanzania, I hold the view that the only way in which Africa is going to immunize herself from the dictations of Western Europe is to work as a united front. It is disappointing, my brother, that when this pandemic came about, we did not have what I call a unified East African approach. I would have loved for Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course South Sudan, and even Ethiopia and Somalia to read from the same script. I would have expected the same from the SADC countries and from ECOWAS, and ultimately that these would have gelled into a continental approach, even for purposes of easing travel. But as always, they succeeded in dividing us and telling us that you should go it alone. The consequence now is that you are asking this question that you're asking: why is Tanzania behaving this way? Why is Kenya behaving this way? While it should have been, why is Africa responding this way?
Right. And so the forefathers of the continent of Africa, the late Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere's, you know, their dream was a unified African continent. And the key question is, what has made it impossible for the continent to really unite? Because we've had a lot of conferences, even in Kigali during the free movement, the FTA, you know, we signed a protocol to allow for free trade across the continent. You've talked about the Maputo Protocol. We've talked about the East African Community Treaty, which are mostly very great on paper, but non-functional on the ground. What is really our disease as a continent?
I think the founding fathers were quite clear, and they identified the problem very early, that the post-colonial agenda and the project of the erstwhile colonizers was to ensure that the already arbitrarily created nations of Africa would not thrive. And you've got to see our current problems in the context of our history. That as early as 1960, as we were struggling for independence, the continent was already divided into two distinct groups. The Casablanca group, led by Kwame Nkrumah, Ahmed Ben Bella at that time, which wanted a united Africa, United States of Africa, almost a federal structure. And the other group, which had been captured by the West, known as the Monrovia group, led by Felix Houphouët-Boigny of La Côte d'Ivoire, were already persuaded that it should not be so. And we ended up in the month of May 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with the Organization of African Unity. And Nkrumah was quite clear: if we do not unite now, we are going to get used to our so-called sovereignties. Our enemies are going to manipulate us. They are going to ensure that we are warring amongst one another, and ultimately it will be very difficult to unite, because in our disunited state, we are more susceptible to manipulation and we are more susceptible to exploitation. And this is what we see now. A continent that is divided into 55 units which claim sovereignty, but which are very weak and incapable of resisting the very aggressive intervention of the conceptual West, and now that of China. And it is very easy, if you come to a country like Kenya or visit Nigeria now, which is under going through very many threats, or in Ethiopia where there is a fratricidal war, or in South Sudan, or in Cameroon, or in Sudan, you can see that it is very easy when you are disunited and small to manipulate and to have fifth columnist politicians mobilizing people on the basis of very dangerous ethnicity. And this is what we see now. And therefore, because countries don't want to surrender their sovereignty, they become satellite states of Western countries. And it's going to continue, because when I look at the current crop of politicians at the helm, there are very few of them who are really Pan-Africanists and are wedded to the Pan-African agenda in the manner that Nkrumah was, in the manner that Patrice Emery Lumumba was, in the manner that Nelson Mandela to a lesser degree was, in the manner that Julius Nyerere was, or later Samora or Thomas Sankara. The current crop of politicians, I'm normally very reluctant to refer to them as leaders. The current crop of politicians are much more preoccupied with occupation of the public space and the political space, first of all, to massage their egos, and number two, because it is a business enterprise. Many African politicians are actually businessmen, and the state is their client. And of course, in order to ensure that they retain that position, they prefer to be little fish in small ponds rather than to be in the ocean where there is real action. Of course, there are few leaders whom I can isolate as being really in the forefront of the struggle to make the Pan-African dream a reality. Paul Kagame, his other problems notwithstanding, is such a leader, and you've seen even the kind of leadership that he has offered just recently in the conflict in Mozambique and his intervention in Cabo Delgado. Very quickly, he didn't hesitate. Such is a leader who stands out. John Joseph Pombe Magufuli was already beginning to manifest those tendencies. Apart from those two, really, I cannot see any other one.
President Uhuru Kenyatta?
Has not convinced me. There is nothing that President Kenyatta has done, in my view, to convince me that he is a dyed-in-the-wool Pan-Africanist. A dyed-in-the-wool Pan-Africanist speaks Pan-Africanism, oozes Pan-Africanism, and to me, with due respect to my good friend Uhuru Kenyatta, I don't think that there is evidence on the table, at least available to me, to suggest to me that he is such a leader that of the Pan-African pedigree. I am not convinced.
You're not convinced?
I'm not convinced.
I want to read your thoughts on the state of the politics of the nation today as we speak. We've had Wafula Chebukati, the IEBC chair, saying that elections, as far as they're concerned, will be on the 9th of August 2022, responding to the claims of a possibility of a postponement of an election. I mean, your take on
Of course, Chebukati is right. The Constitution is quite clear that the elections will be held on Tuesday, on second Tuesday, on the 5th day of after 5 years, and that is the 9th day of August. But what is tragic is that even as my good friend and classmate Chebukati announces this raft of things that must be done, the truth is that there are people who have been campaigning since the year 2017. There are some of them who have been on a campaign trail since the year 1997. The tragedy is this, that when a country is in a permanent and constant state of campaigning, it undermines the economy. And particularly when a country's politics is based on ethnic mobilization, and the kingpins are fundamentally low-voltage ethnic warlords whose claim to fame is that they mobilize and weaponize their ethnicities, then the country is in grave danger. In many countries, 1 year to the elections, you would not hear about elections because you have the business of governing. You have the business of delivering services to the people. Right now, you go to many of the counties, there is no activity. People are already angling for this or that office. You go to funerals, that is what they are doing. At the national level, you see the so-called leaders engage in meeting after meeting. And what they are doing is to focus on an election that is 364 days away at the expense of economic agenda. The net effect, and this is informed by the experience that we have had in this country, if you are an investor, you would not invest in Kenya from this day on. You would wait until the year 2023, because we have also demonstrated that after every election we engage or we find ourselves in a period of instability which takes almost a year to stabilize. Yeah. So that if I was an investor, I would now be going to Uganda, and it's happening. I would now be going to Tanzania, and it's happening. I would now be going to Rwanda, and it's happening. You look at what is happening to the port of Mombasa. Most of the goods are now migrating from the port of Mombasa to the port of Dar es Salaam. The Ugandans are using the port of Dar es Salaam more. The Rwandese are using the port of Dar es Salaam more. Eastern Congo is using the port of Dar es Salaam more. Burundi is using the port of Dar es Salaam more. South Sudan is using Port Sudan more. Ethiopia is using Djibouti and Asmara more. We are losing. Our economy is shrinking because we have mannerless and selfish politicians. And these politicians are the very same. They have no agenda, none of them. These are the very same people who have been, they were in Moi's administration, they were in Kibaki's administration, they are in Uhuru's administration, and there's nothing new that they are telling the country. These are individuals who want to occupy the office of the presidency in order to fulfill the dreams, I'm told, the dreams of their tribes or the dreams of personal ambition, and it's tragic. And one of the things that I must say, we are the only country in the world where potential presidential candidates are retirees enjoying pension. It is dishonest. Raila Odinga is a pensioner from politics. Kalonzo Musyoka is a pensioner from politics. Musalia Mudavadi is a pensioner from politics. And we don't call them out. How can they be enjoying taxpayers' money as pensioners and continue to engage in the same politics from which they purportedly retire? They'll tell me, we did not retire from politics, we retired from the office of Prime Minister, Vice President, and Deputy Prime Minister. Complete nonsense. Right. The problem in Kenya is the assumption by a certain class of politicians who have been active in the last 30 years that all Kenyans are a bunch of dunderheads, a bunch of nincompoops who can be manipulated, and this is tragic. Unfortunately, people like us are very easily dismissed as theoreticians who are talking about utopia. Because when the chips are down, these politicians say the road meets the rubber when they meet their real electorate who do not care about these so-called intellectual arguments. But if we are not careful, one day the country will pay for this, because we are now going into an election where none of the candidates is prepared to lose. They are prepared for only one thing, to win. And if they don't win, they will say they have been rigged, and remember, they have weaponized their constituencies. Look at the number of militias that are now beginning to emerge in different parts of the country. They are being weaponized, and they are being prepared to reject the outcome, particularly of the presidential elections. I pray and hope that sanity will find space in the minds and hearts of those politicians.
Right.
Mwalimu Julius Nyerere used to say in Kiswahili, siri ya maendeleo ni watu, ardhi na siasa safi. And when you talk about siasa safi, that is where corruption comes in. Unfortunately, Kenyan elections, particularly since 1988, has been defined and has been dictated by corruption. And I think we assumed the worst level in terms of the acceptance of corruption as part of Kenya's political DNA in 1992 with the advent of a ginger group called the Youth for KANU 92. That is when bribery, open bribery, became the fuel that moved Kenyan election. That is the period when you saw those who became real major players in the political class were former civil servants. Just take a head count. Former civil servants who had stolen as heads of parastatals, stolen as permanent secretaries, then came into the political arena, and distribution of money and other goodies became part of the manner in which we play politics. Today, corruption is the defining factor in the Kenyan electoral process. And I remember when we were in the process of making the constitution and gathering people's views in the year 2002, we did suggest that we introduce hygiene in Kenyan politics by ensuring that expenditure in the political process is controlled. This ultimately found its way in the philosophy underpinning the Constitution of Kenya 2020 and now the Election Financing Act, which Chairman Chebukati has now talked about. And the politicians you've seen have already railed against it. They say, no, you cannot cap it, which means, first of all, that they have the resources.
Right.
You know, I mean, when you talk about the hundreds of millions that have been, or tens of millions which have been deployed as the cap for different categories of political competitors, and 4.4 billion for presidential candidate, it tells you how corrupt, how expensive our elections are. And in any event, I understand where Chairman Chebukati is coming from. But remember that it makes nonsense of those caps because these politicians have been campaigning throughout. How do they campaign? One, your CMA is what are they called? This CMCs. Have award fund. MCAs. They have a award fund. That fund is fundamentally a slush fund. How is it a slush fund? If you were to examine it, and you only have to look at the Auditor General's reports, you will discover that many of the companies that trade with the award are either associated with the MCA or they are directly theirs. So out of that fund, they get a lot of money. The Constituency Development Fund is also another fund which is available for abuse by the members of parliament. The governors on their part, in the last 8 years, we have produced multi-billionaires through that fund. And of course, the women have their fund, the senators have their fund, and the political parties fund is another slush fund. You've seen the report of the Auditor General as regard the Jubilee Fund. We have not heard what has happened to the ODM fund. All these funds, which are essentially taxpayers' money, has been available for these political players for purposes of campaigning throughout. Tell me, relative to our GDP, how do you explain these politicians crisscrossing the country in helicopters? How do they finance them? How do they, in an economy such as ours, how do you have politicians traveling to their rural homes in helicopters for whole weekends every weekend? It is a multi-million shilling enterprise. So what I'm saying is that the campaign has been going on since the year 2017. What Chairman Chebukati is talking about are funds that will be deployed to buy T-shirts and to buy kangas and other paraphernalia just in the very short period of the election. What we must strive to do is to introduce what I've earlier referred to as hygiene in our politics. In fact, if we were to conduct credible elections, this idea of party agents should be eliminated. The electoral body should be able to employ agents who preside over an electoral process. We should be able to have the IEBC organizing political rallies in terms of town hall meetings and having the parties articulate their agenda. But sometimes I fear that our politics has sunk so deep in the muck and mire of negative ethnicity and corruption that until and unless this generation of politicians, as long as they are alive and active, Kenyan politics will never know change because they have inculcated bad habits into the political arena. In a manner of speaking, is like the Israelites. They left Egypt, but Egypt is still resident in them. This crop of politicians and their acolytes and hirelings can never participate in an election that is devoid of corruption.
Right. And Prof, when we were talking earlier on, you mentioned that these leaders are the same.
Yeah.
They have no agenda for this country. They don't mean well for the country. But the sad reality, going by what you just said, is that come 2022, when they'll be announcing the winner of the presidential election, there is a high chance that one of them
that is the tragedy of Africa. And in fact, if you want to answer the question why Kenya can never realize our potential, why Africa can never realize our potential, is what Albert Einstein once said: doing the same thing every time and expecting a different result. That we keep on recycling these leaders, the very same, and you expect that there will be a different. Tell me, of these individuals who have already declared themselves to be the presidential candidates, were they not cabinet ministers in Moi's cabinet? Were they not cabinet ministers in Kibaki's cabinet? Some of them, are they not cabinet ministers in President Uhuru Kenyatta's cabinet? Have they not always been there, some of them since 1982, some of them since 1992? What bright ideas could they possibly have? Some of them have been members of parliament when we had CDF. Go to the constituencies where they presided over. Is there any tangible change that they have brought? Some of them have been real leaders in the era of devolution. Tell me what they have done in health. Tell me what they have done in education. Tell me what they have done in agriculture. Nothing. But tell me what they have done for themselves. They have become multi-billionaires. So the problem is also with us, the electorate, at least the majority of the electorate. Because your typical Kenyan elector, on the day of the election, they'll vote for individuals. If they are president, is because he's from my ethnic group, or he is aligned with somebody from my ethnic group, or because he or she is from my clan, or because he or she has bribed me. When you continue to vote on that basis, then the results will be the same. Then your education sector will suffer. Then your health sector will suffer. Then your agriculture will suffer. Then your infrastructure will suffer. Then you will suffer and the country does not grow. Unfortunately, we are co-authors of our own misfortune.
We are co-authors of our own misfortune. But sometimes these politicians you've mentioned, they say, yes, we've been in those positions, but we've not been president. And they always argue that the buck stops with the president when it comes to the management of the affairs of the country. But then again, the citizenry, perhaps lack of options. You know, if you're not running,
it's not lack of options. Yes. Let me tell you, I at one time in the year 2007, I attested this thing so that this question you ask me, when it arises, I can tell you that I have actual experience. I attempted to contest in Kamukunji constituency. And let me tell you what my experience was, and I've rendered it in a book, A Call for Hygiene in Kenyan Politics and Sanitizing Kenyan Politics. The experience is, I believe, what other sensible and well-meaning Kenyan politician would experience. One, when you are campaigning amongst people who are not voters in that area, because in Nairobi, you'll find most of the Luo voters have taken their vote in Kibera. most of the Luhya voters have taken their votes in Westlands, so that even in what you call a cosmopolitan area, voting is on the basis of ethnicity. And those who win will have mastered goons, they will bribe the electorate, and that is what the electorate responds to. The problem of Africa is that we have an electorate that is not moved by ideas. And this is not only unique to Kenya, it's the African problem. If you go to countries such as Sweden, the Scandinavian ideas, I'm now watching what is happening in Germany. The people are campaigning on the basis of two major things. Climate change.
Bring that here in Kenya.
And they say climate change. Even if I wanted to talk, I see some of the presidential candidates are talking about the economy. But there is no in-depth analysis of what they are putting on the table. The Kenyan electorate, the African electorate must liberate itself from this quandary of using the ballot box to put a seal of approval in ethnic warlords. As long as it continues in this basis, let me tell you, Africa will never realize their potential. And Kenya is in a worse state because now, apart from bribery, there is the continued use of militias. There is a research that is being undertaken by a friend of mine now, and he is amazed at the number of militias that are beginning to emerge. I do not have empirical evidence, but I have anecdotal evidence. And you've seen recently the re-emergence of gangs in the coastal part of Kenya. If you look at many of those gangs, they'll be allied to politicians. And you'll see it even in public rallies. Politicians are accompanied by goons who will boo you down so that you don't even make your point. So in as much as you say there are no options, there is a crop of politicians in Kenya who have succeeded in smothering credible opposition. And when you gave them the political parties' funds, that was one of the ways in which they have used to smother credible opposition. And if you don't bow down to these ethnic warlord, these demigods of ethnicity, these latter-day Baals, then you are going nowhere in Kenyan politics. One day, and I look forward to that day, when the electorate will wake up and reject them in their entirety, that is the way the day will have introduced a new oxygen into the Kenyan political system. But I don't see that happening in the next two election cycles.
Right. Prof, before we finalize, I mean, there's been a lot that has been said as far as the president and his deputy is concerned. There are those who have outrightly called them out and said they are embarrassing the country, depending or based on how they are behaving in public. We've seen Deputy President William Ruto just the other day coming out to condemn the government, and people have been asking which government is he condemning on the handling of the Turkish investor Aydin. And I want to read your thoughts on whether you feel this was bound to happen, because we've always seen every election period, there's always a new outfit, there's always new euphoria, and so on and so forth. What is your take, and what would you be telling these two leaders as far as the country is concerned?
When you look at this, let us not, this is not unique in Kenyan history, but perhaps this is the most infantile and the most embarrassing. You'll remember very early on, immediately after independence, we had Joe Murumbi as the vice president, then we had Oginga Odinga and Jomo Kenyatta, and you will remember how disrespectful Oginga Odinga was to Jomo Kenyatta in Kisumu, exchanging publicly in 1969 with Jomo Kenyatta at that time, and ultimately it led to his resignation. You will remember also when President Moi took over office, he had three vice presidents. He had Dr. Karanja as a vice president. He had Mwai Kibaki as a president. He had, as a vice president, he had George Saitoti as a vice president. And you saw that even when President Kibaki took over office, and President Kibaki was the much more laid-back person, but you can remember how his administration was subjected to rancor by the then Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who was the effective number 2. And were it not for President Kibaki's laid-back approach, it would have been the same thing. And you can see, I'm giving you this history to demonstrate to you that this kind of conduct within that upper echelon of administration of Kenya is not unique. But I think this is the most embarrassing. It is embarrassing because we now see a number of state activities where you expect the vice president or deputy president to be present at. He is not. We now see the deputy president actively participating in a political formation other than that on the basis of which he was elected into office. We now see exchanges between the deputy president and the president publicly. We now see activities that are essentially designed to humiliate the deputy president. We see the president canoodling with the opposition and excluding his deputy president. This is embarrassing. And unfortunately, we are exporting these manners outside of the country. The recent spat involving a Turkish national has involved the Ugandan administration and the national resistance movement in Uganda. It has involved the Turkish government. It is embarrassing. And this speaks to the quality of our politics as a country, because our politics is not informed by any clear ideology, and because our political parties are simply election vehicles, there is no ideology that unites President Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto. They simply came together because a combination of the two of them guaranteed an ethnic majority which could defeat the other ethnic combination. And once again, you can see that this is what is happening. We normally have these fair weather, seasonal ethnic alliances. So in a nutshell, what is happening now between President Kenyatta and Deputy President Ruto is an embarrassment. It is sad. It is unfortunate. It's depicting our country as a country whose political habits are juvenile and infantile at the same time. It is sad. I pray and hope that this kind of thing should be brought to a stop. I would have expected two things ought to have happened. If I was William Ruto, I would have resigned. I'm quite clear in my mind. I would have resigned. If I was President Kenyatta, I would have told my deputy president, we may disagree. I know you want to resign, but I don't want you to resign. Let us continue to engage constructively so that even if there is no obvious camaraderie between us, but for the sake of the country, we are seen to be pulling in the same direction. In other words, the option of Deputy President Ruto is to resign, but I don't think he can, because if he makes that mistake from a political standpoint, he'll be smothered. So it'd rather he remains inside so that he enjoys some of the protection that a Deputy President enjoys. On the part of President Kenyatta, he also is not sure whether the Deputy President Ruto does not have the requisite clout to defeat any attempt at removing him. And in between is Kenya. In between is peace and tranquility. In between is you and me, who are being subjected to this kind of humiliation. I've gone out of the country, and every time I'm interviewed by media houses outside the country, they say, what is happening to your country? What is happening to your country? Every election cycle you fight, and your leaders are always fighting in public. What is wrong with your country? I am asked. And when I'm out of the country, I try to be as polite as I can to my country. But in a nutshell, is embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. Prof, I'll not end this conversation without asking you this. You were recently in the United States.
Yes.
You had a very successful tour in the United States. And I want to talk about police brutality. The country has continued to see some of the incidences where, you know, there are some disappearances only for young men and women to be, bodies to be discovered by the riverbanks. And I'm not here alleging or saying that it is the police that have done that, but there are some outright cases where people have said it was the police that actually did the following things. You went and eulogized with the family of the late Floyd. And I want to read your thoughts on what you feel would be the solution to ending police brutality in Kenya. What do we need? We had police reforms and we still hear of these cases. What do we need to end police brutality in the country? Recently,
and I do not know the authenticity of this particular survey, but the survey is reported by one of the media houses, The Print, to have said that 50% of Kenyan police officers are unhappy with their jobs. If that survey is true, it tells you there is a problem. Which means that there could be a problem at the point of recruitment.
Yeah.
There could also be a problem at the point of training. And you and me know that we have had cases, anecdotal evidence of people who are being recruited into these forces through bribery. So that, I think, is the foundational problem. I'll give you a personal example recently, which is just a week ago. I think that was in the first week of the second week of the second day or the third day of August. Had the misfortune of going to represent a client in Makadara. This is a gentleman who had entered into a contract which was simply a contract. The other side reported him for obtaining money by false pretense. The case is still on. I'll not mention the case itself. But what amazed me, that the entire system of the police force had been so weaponized against this individual that I asked the police officers, why does it take 8 police officers to arrest a person whom I have personally surrendered in court? And during that incident, one police officer said, tutamfunza. I'm giving this personal experience to tell you that there is a problem with our police force. And something must be done. We thought that when we had changed from police force to service, then we had changed it. But we must now ask ourselves, how do we train our police officers? Who do we allow to get into the police office, into the police service? Recently, when we were in the process of recruiting those who are going to serve in the IEBC, we subjected them to a psychometric test. Is it not the time now to subject those who are joining the police office to a psychometric test? I remember in 1998, I visited the United States of America at that time, and we were with my good friend, I think, Mutai Kagwith and Gishira Kibara.
Yeah.
And we visited 2 police offices through two states. It was on corruption and the police force. We visited the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, which was reputed to have the best police force, and we visited New Orleans, Baton Rouge in New Orleans, which was reputed to have one of the worst police forces, but which was changing. And during our conversation, they said, you've got to clean up your recruitment process. You've got to know who you are recruiting. You've got to know who you are training. You've got to be careful how do you train them, and you've got to embed your police office in the community. Right. And in that way, they say they begin to see changes. Today, that is not the truth about training. In the United States of America, which, as you rightly said, I visited quite a number of states, had conversation with police officers and other people in the civil rights movement. There is now a deliberate effort to retrain or to look at the police forces anew. I think that there is a sense in which many police forces, including the ones like ours, which now call themselves services, still are reeling from the hangover of the colonial approach to policing. And policing is now about facilitating and enabling the society.
Right.
You go to countries such as Japan, You see how police officers, they behave like Boy Scouts and Girl Guides. And that does not mean that they are not effective in policing. They become friendly. You remember at one time in this country, we introduced something that was called community policing, complete with stations in different estates, which was meant to ensure that the police were operating within the community. I don't know what happened to that. Yeah. I think there is a need to look at these things, and merely denying that the police are not involved does not help the case. Because once the society believes that the police have gone rogue, then they are going to be hostile to the police. And the last thing I want to say, I think there is a problem with our police services in this country. Yeah. When you see that one of the largest growth industries in a country is private security firms, it means that we are surrendering the policing service to people who have not been trained anywhere. Look at the number of security firms that are emerging in Kenya and continue to emerge, whether in Nairobi or in rural Kenya. It means that the police service is no longer discharging their functions effectively, and people are becoming more and more reliant on private security service who are not controlled, whose level and manner of training we do not know. This is the time when, instead of issuing threats, those who are in charge of internal security, those who are in charge of the police service, should sit back in humility and ask, what can we do to create a true service, which is a service to the people of Kenya? Particularly as we are approaching the elections, where we'll require that policing is at its very best to nip violence in the bud.